All right, let's just jump right into today's explainer because what we're looking at today is, well, it's profoundly unsettling. We are breaking down the literal anatomy of a nightmare. Specifically, we're going to look at exactly how completely ordinary, everyday situations can just instantly devolve into life-threatening encounters. We're going to analyze 3 meticulously documented case studies of survival, pulling apart the precise moments where normalcy completely shattered and primal instincts had to take over. Take a look at the core theme presented in this quote: extreme, suffocating isolation. Whether it's a desolate parking lot, a dark alleyway, or the pitch-black woods, isolation is the ultimate common denominator in the case studies we're examining today. You see that silence? That is exactly what predators rely on. Case Study 1. The setup. The isolated motel room. So picture this. This first case study follows a commercial refrigeration repairman who's booked into a remote, nearly empty motel up in northern Pennsylvania. Notice how methodically the dread actually escalates on his very first night. At 7 p.m., he checks in and notices a guy just sitting motionless in a dark green pickup truck with the headlights totally off. By 10:30 p.m., he hears heavy footsteps pacing right outside his door. At midnight, he hears metal lightly scraping against his door handle, and when he looks through the peephole, he sees a crouching figure. Finally, at 5:15 a.m., his truck alarm is triggered by a tall man in a dark jacket. This wasn't just random vandalism, folks. This was a calculated test of his defenses. And that brings us to an absolutely horrifying realization the very next day. After working a grueling shift, our mechanic returns to the motel. The desk clerk casually offers to move him closer to the office, and she accidentally lets slip this truly chilling phrase: "It usually doesn't happen 2 nights in a row." She reveals that drifters normally target the motel and then just move on. In that moment, the mechanic suddenly realizes he hasn't just had a run of bad luck. He has walked right into an established, recognized pattern of predatory behavior. Exhausted, he decides, okay, I'll just stay one more night. Big mistake. At 8 p.m., that same dark green pickup truck returns and parks at the end of the lot. By 11 p.m., those terrifying slow footsteps return. But then something happens that changes everything. He suddenly hears a key working the lock of the room directly next door, and he knows for an absolute fact the room next door was completely empty. The attackers don't just jiggle the handle and leave. No, they initiate a coordinated, multi-point psychological and physical attack. Imagine hearing a soft tap on your window. Then, the agonizing sound of a fingernail dragging slowly down the glass, followed by a heavy, testing hit on the shared wall from the empty room next door. And then, his frosted bathroom window actually begins to push open. He takes desperate countermeasures, physically shoving the bathroom window shut and barricading his front door with a chair, all while whispering to a 911 dispatcher. As soon as the police headlights sweep across the curtains, he hears multiple sets of footsteps scatter into the night. But when the police investigate, they reveal a truly terrifying statistic: 2. They knew of exactly 2 prior incidents in just the last 6 months involving lone, out-of-town men targeted at this exact motel. The attackers were likely following workers straight from their job sites, just waiting until they were isolated to breach their rooms. But honestly, the absolute most chilling detail is what he found while he was hastily packing his bags to get out of there. Shoved almost against the wall, deep under his bed, was a torn square of a local newspaper. Written on the back in pen, his exact room number, and his truck's license plate. This terrifying discovery proves beyond a doubt that this was a highly premeditated stalking operation, and it leaves us with a deeply unsettling question: how long had they actually been inside his room before he ever even arrived? Case Study 2. the escalation, the online match. Let's pivot and look at how modern digital boundaries can just instantaneously collapse into intense physical danger. This quote right here establishes the psychological baseline of the threat. The subject matched with a guy named Killian on Tinder. He was in the military, stationed nearby. Without them ever even going on a single date, his behavior became violently possessive, sending unhinged messages exactly like the one you see on screen. She blocked him, obviously, but out of sheer fear of his threats, she eventually accepted a new request from him weeks later, basically just to monitor his erratic behavior and keep tabs on the threat. There's this terrifying contrast here between virtual stalking and physical reality. Online, he was constantly demanding she turn on her Snapchat map so he could track her location. She refused every time. But despite her never giving him her address, the virtual threat materialized in the real world. After being dropped off by a friend at 1 a.m., she was walking up the alleyway to her home, only to hear a man call her name from the shadows. It was him. Let's break down the sheer brutality of what happened next. He immediately grabbed her throat, slammed her head into a wall, and interrogated her about who she was just with. He threw her to the ground and began choking her so violently that she actually began to lose consciousness. But then, an incredibly bizarre stroke of luck, he suddenly let go, cursed out loud that the last bus was leaving in exactly 3 minutes, and he just ran. With severely damaged vocal cords, she barely managed to escape to a best friend's house, which eventually led to the police issuing her an emergency tracking alarm. Now, you might be thinking, okay, she survived, the attack is over, right? Well, was it over? The terrifying answer is no. This threat remains highly active. Just days before this source material was documented, she was actually followed by a friend of Killian's acting as an accomplice. She now lives in a constant state of hypervigilance, carrying that police tracker literally everywhere she goes, knowing full well that her attacker's ultimate intention was to end her life. Case Study 3. The Climax. The Encirclement. For our final case study, we're heading deep into the Smoky Mountains for a solo camping trip, where pure situational awareness became the literal only barrier against a nameless threat. After hiking in and setting up his camp, our subject, Mike, was enjoying a small fire at dusk when he heard human footsteps. A man appeared between the trees about 40 feet away, just staring at him. When Mike tried to engage him, the stranger deflected and asked this critical, incredibly probing question: "Are you out here alone?" Mike utilized a brilliant survival tactic right here on the spot. He lied. He confidently stated his friends were meeting him very soon. The stranger just nodded slowly and then melted right back into the dark woods. And this is where the agonizing psychological torture begins. Mike retreated to his tent, but obviously he couldn't sleep. By nightfall, he heard footsteps purposefully crunching in a tight circle around his tent. Then, dead silence. And then, perhaps the most terrifying detail of this entire explainer, the distinct sound of a slow, human exhale right against the thin, nylon fabric of his tent. Someone was standing mere inches away, just waiting for him to make a move. Mike literally played dead for hours, just listening to the footsteps fade and return all night long. But as dawn finally broke and light hit the tent, he scrambled out, which prompted the sound of running footsteps fleeing into the woods. But here's the truly terrifying truth. It wasn't just one person running. It was several, which forces us to ask the incredibly disturbing question: as Mike lay motionless in the pitch black, how many people were actually standing in a silent circle around his tent? So Mike grabs whatever he can carry, sprints to his car, locks the doors, and just passes out from sheer exhaustion. Hours later, in the safety of broad daylight, he tried to rationalize the terror. He walked back up the trail to retrieve the expensive camping gear he'd left behind. But when he reached the clearing, everything was gone. His tent, his sleeping bag, his supplies. The earth had been completely stripped bare, leaving absolutely nothing but a black circle of ashes from his fire. The anatomy of real fear, trusting your survival instincts. So, pulling all of this together, the motel stalkers, the digital predator, and the deep woods encirclement, what can we actually learn from this? We see that all three of these survivors relied on very specific, actionable tactics. They lied to perceive threats, like the camper faking a larger group. They forfeited social politeness for safety, like the mechanic barricading his door, even though he worried he might just be overreacting. They maintained relentless situational awareness, and crucially, they were willing to leave all their physical belongings behind just to escape with their lives. It's so easy for us to just think we're safe in our daily routines, right? Inside our locked rooms and our curated digital spaces. But as we've seen in this explainer, the boundary between everyday life and absolute terror is razor thin. It requires constant vigilance, it requires complete trust in your gut instincts, and an absolute refusal to be an easy target. Which leaves us with one final vital question to think about. If the nightmare found you tonight, would you be ready?